"I need leftovers, and you need a daughter," said the poor girl to the CEO who lost his daughter. "If the title touched your heart, just imagine what's coming next. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell us where you're watching from." The December wind cut through William Harrison's expensive overcoat like it was paper, but he barely felt it. For 4 years, he'd maintained the facade of the grieving but functional CEO, attending board meetings, making strategic decisions, keeping Harrison Industries profitable. But tonight, on the 4th anniversary of losing Rebecca and Lily, the carefully constructed walls had finally crumbled. He found himself in an unfamiliar part of the city, blocks away from his penthouse, stumbling through narrow streets lined with small shops and modest apartments. The kind of neighborhood where families lived, where children played on sidewalks, where the American dream existed in smaller, warmer packages than his empty mansion had ever offered. Behind Milano's Italian restaurant, he collapsed against a brick wall, finally allowing the 4 years of suppressed anguish to pour out of him. His shoulders shook with sobs that came from a place so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Daddy, will you always protect me?" Lily's 7-year-old voice echoed in his memory, her bright green eyes sparkling with trust on that last perfect morning before the drunk driver stole everything. "Mister?" A small voice penetrated his grief. "Are you hurt?" William looked up through his tears to see a little girl standing at the mouth of the alley. She appeared to be about 7, Lily's age when she died, with dark hair in 2 neat braids and large brown eyes that held an unusual depth of understanding. She wore a clean but obviously second-hand winter coat and carried a small thermal lunch bag. William's voice came out as a rasp. He cleared his throat, trying to find some semblance of composure. "I'm okay, sweetheart. You shouldn't be talking to strangers." The girl tilted her head, studying him with the frank assessment only children possessed. "You don't look okay. You look like how I felt when I first came to live with Grandma Maggie, all broken inside, but trying to pretend you weren't." The simple observation hit William harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. "What's your name?" "Isabella, but everyone calls me Bella." She took a careful step closer. "What's yours?" "William." He found himself accepting her small hand when she offered it, her fingers warm against his cold skin. "What are you doing out here, Bella?" "It's getting dark." Isabella held up her lunch bag. "Getting tomorrow's lunch from Chef Marco. He always saves me pasta or soup after the dinner rush. Grandma Maggie works late at the medical clinic on Tuesdays, so I come here after school instead of going to aftercare." William's protective instincts, dormant for 4 years, suddenly flared. "You walk here alone?" "It's only 4 blocks from school, and I know all the shop owners. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop watches me cross the big street." Isabella said this matter-of-factly, suggesting it was a well-established routine. "Chef Marco says it's not charity because I help him by eating food that would go bad otherwise." The explanation revealed a 7-year-old navigating adult complexities with remarkable maturity. William's business mind processed the information. A child managing her own afternoon schedule, a grandmother working late to make ends meet, a family maintaining dignity while accepting help. "Where are your parents, Bella?" Isabella's expression grew solemn. "They went to heaven when I was little. Grandma Maggie is my family now. She's the best grandma in the world, even when things are hard." The matter-of-fact way she spoke of loss resonated deeply in William's chest. Here was another child who understood grief, who'd learned to navigate the world without the protection most 7-year-olds took for granted. "I'm sorry you lost your parents," William said quietly. "I'm sorry you're sad," Isabella replied with equal sincerity. "Did you lose someone too?" William nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in his throat. Isabella sat down on the pavement beside him, apparently unconcerned about her clean clothes. "Grandma Maggie says that sadness is love with nowhere to go. She says the sadness proves how much love we had. The profound simplicity of the statement took William's breath away. Your grandmother sounds very wise. She is. She used to be a nurse, so she knows about taking care of people and making them feel better. Isabella swung her legs thoughtfully. Mr. William, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you very lonely? Because you look like you are, and I know about being lonely, even when you're not really alone. William stared at this extraordinary child, who'd somehow identified the core of his pain with surgical precision. Yes, Bella, I'm very lonely. Isabella nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. I thought so. I used to be lonely like that too, even though Grandma Maggie loves me so much. It's different from the regular kind of lonely. How do you mean? Regular lonely is when you want someone to play with or talk to. But the other kind is when you have love inside you but nobody to give it to, so it just sits there, making you sad. William felt tears spring to his eyes again. This 7-year-old had just articulated something he'd never been able to put into words. Bella, he said carefully, that's exactly right. How did you get so wise? She shrugged. Grandma Maggie says sad things teach us about love things, if we pay attention. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, an unlikely pair sharing the growing dusk. William found himself studying Isabella's face, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the careful way she chose her words, the natural empathy that seemed to guide her interactions. Mr. William? Isabella's voice was very quiet now. I have an idea, but I don't know if it's a good one. Tell me. Isabella took a deep breath, gathering courage for something important. Well, I heard some of the grown-ups at school talking about you. They said you used to have a little girl, but she went to heaven, and now you don't know what to do with all the daddy love you have left. William's heart clenched. They said that? Mrs. Peterson in the office and Mr. Garcia from maintenance. They were talking about how sad it was, how you disappeared from being on TV and everything. Isabella's eyes were earnest and serious. And I was thinking, I need help sometimes, with things like homework and reaching tall shelves and having someone come to school events when Grandma Maggie's back hurts too bad. And you need someone to give your daddy love to. William felt the world shift around him. Bella, what are you suggesting? Maybe we could help each other. I'm not trying to replace your little girl, she added quickly, with wisdom far beyond her years. And you wouldn't replace my mommy and daddy. But maybe you could be like a daddy to me, and I could be like a daughter to you, just until we both feel better. The proposition hit William like lightning. It was innocent, logical, and devastating in its simple honesty. She wasn't asking for money or pity. She was offering a trade, mutual healing that somehow made perfect sense in this moment of shared understanding. Isabella, he said slowly, that's very thoughtful. But it's complicated. I don't know if I remember how to be a good father. And your grandmother would need to approve any... Grandma Maggie would like you, Isabella interrupted with absolute certainty. She always says the saddest people usually have the biggest hearts, and she worries about me not having any father figures, especially when I get older. Church bells chimed somewhere in the distance, marking 5 o'clock. Isabella stood up, brushing off her coat. I should go meet Grandma Maggie at the clinic. She gets off work soon, and we walk home together. She paused, looking down at William with hope and uncertainty. Will you think about what I said, about helping each other? William found himself nodding. I'll think about it, Bella, but we'd need to talk to your grandmother first. She's your family, and nothing happens without her permission. Isabella's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire expression. Really? You'll really think about it? I promise. Okay. Isabella bounced slightly on her toes, excitement overriding her usual careful composure. Mr. William, would you like to walk with me to the clinic? I could introduce you to Grandma Maggie right now if you want. William hesitated. Everything about this situation was surreal, completely outside his controlled, structured existence. But something in Isabella's hopeful expression, combined with the genuine peace he'd felt during their conversation, made him push himself up from the wall. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's go meet Grandma Maggie." As they walked through the December dusk, Isabella chattering about her school day and pointing out various neighborhood landmarks, William felt something he hadn't experienced in 4 years: curiosity about tomorrow. This remarkable child had somehow pierced through his grief-induced isolation and offered him something he'd thought was lost forever: purpose, connection, the possibility of mattering to someone again. He had no idea that in 20 minutes he would discover a connection to Isabella that went far deeper than mutual need, or that their first meeting hadn't been coincidence at all, but the universe finally bringing two survivors of the same tragedy together to heal. The Riverside Community Health Clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted brownstone, its waiting room filled with the quiet bustle of families seeking affordable medical care. Isabella pushed through the glass doors with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey countless times, William following nervously behind. "Grandma Maggie," Isabella called out, waving to a woman emerging from one of the examination rooms. "I brought someone to meet you." Margaret Sullivan, at 68, moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades caring for others. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite the obvious fatigue in her eyes, her face lit up when she saw Isabella. That expression grew puzzled, then concerned, when she noticed the tall, expensive-looking stranger hovering uncertainly near the entrance. "Isabella, honey, who is this gentleman?" Margaret asked, her protective instincts immediately alert. "This is Mr. William," Isabella announced proudly. "He was very sad, sitting behind Milano's, so I talked to him and made him feel better, and I had an idea about how we could help each other." Margaret's eyes sharpened as she took in William's appearance more carefully. Even disheveled from his emotional breakdown, his clothes screamed wealth and privilege, but it was his face that gave her pause. The hollow, haunted expression she recognized from her own mirror during the worst months after losing her daughter and son-in-law. "Ma'am," William said, extending his hand, "I'm William Harrison. I apologize for the unusual circumstances. Your granddaughter found me having a difficult moment, and she's been remarkably kind." Margaret studied his face carefully, her nursing instincts analyzing everything from his posture to his tone of voice. After 30 years in healthcare, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read people's genuine intentions. "Mr. Harrison," she said carefully, shaking his hand, "I'm Margaret Sullivan, and while I'm grateful for any kindness Isabella has shown, I'm curious about how a 7-year-old came to be counseling a grown man." "She has an extraordinary heart," William said quietly, "and an unusual wisdom about grief and loss." Margaret's expression softened slightly at the sincerity in his voice. "Mr. Harrison, forgive me for being direct, but you look like a man who's been through hell. Are you all right?" William's composure cracked. "No, ma'am, I'm not. I lost my wife and daughter 4 years ago, and today I finally stopped being able to pretend I was handling it." The raw honesty in his words hit Margaret squarely in the chest. She'd heard that same broken tone in her own voice for months after the accident that had killed David and Maria Santos, leaving her to raise their traumatized 3-year-old daughter. "Oh, honey," she said softly, her professional demeanor melting into genuine compassion. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "Grandma Maggie," Isabella piped up, tugging on her grandmother's white coat. "I told Mr. William that maybe we could help each other. He needs a family to love, and we need." She hesitated, then continued with careful diplomacy. "We need help sometimes, too." Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. Isabella rose. "It's okay," William interrupted gently. "She's not wrong. I'm very wealthy, and money can solve some problems. But Mrs. Sullivan, that's not why I'm here. Your granddaughter offered me something money can't buy: purpose, connection, a reason to keep going. Margaret looked between William's earnest face and Isabella's hopeful expression. As a nurse, she'd seen enough people in crisis to distinguish between genuine grief and something more manipulative. This man was drowning, but there was nothing predatory in his demeanor, only desperate loneliness. "Mr. Harrison," she said slowly, "what exactly are you suggesting?" William ran a hand through his hair. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Isabella proposed that I could be like a father to her, and she could be like a daughter to me. I know how that sounds. I know how complicated and impossible it seems. But Mrs. Sullivan, I haven't felt this present, this alive, in 4 years." Margaret's mind raced through the implications. A grieving billionaire wanting to play father to her granddaughter. It sounded like the premise for either a heartwarming story or a cautionary tale. But Isabella's response to him was telling. Her granddaughter had always been an excellent judge of character. "Are you receiving any professional help for your grief, Mr. Harrison?" William shook his head. "I should be. I know I should be. I couldn't face it." "Well, that would be my first requirement," Margaret said firmly. "If you want any involvement in our lives, you get therapy. Grief like yours doesn't heal on its own." "That's fair," William agreed immediately. "Second, we take this incredibly slowly. Isabella has already lost one set of parents. I won't let her get attached to someone who might disappear when the reality sets in." "I understand completely." Margaret studied his face, looking for any sign of hesitation or insincerity. Finding none, she continued. "Third, I need to know more about who you are. Background, references, why a successful businessman is sitting in alleys on Tuesday evenings." "Of course. Mrs. Sullivan, I'll provide whatever information you need. Complete transparency." Isabella had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement. "So we can try. We can be a family?" Margaret and William looked at each other over the little girl's head. The situation was unprecedented, potentially problematic, but there was something in William's eyes, a desperate hope that matched her own exhaustion, that made her decision for her. "We can try," she said quietly. "Very carefully, very slowly. But Isabella, this isn't a game. This is about real feelings and real relationships." Isabella threw her arms around both of them. "I knew it would work. I knew you'd understand each other." Edie, as they stood there in the clinic's waiting room, an unlikely trio brought together by loss and hope, Margaret felt compelled to share something she'd been keeping to herself for 4 years. "Mr. Harrison," she said quietly, "before we go any further, there's something you should know about Isabella's story, something that it might change how you feel about all this." William looked down at Isabella, then back at Margaret. "What do you mean?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Isabella lost her parents, David and Maria Santos, in a car accident on October 15th, 2019. Highway 94, near the Maple Street overpass, around 6:30 in the evening." William went very still. The color drained from his face as the date and location registered. That's not possible." "A drunk driver ran a red light and hit 2 cars simultaneously," Margaret continued, watching William's expression carefully. "One car contained a young couple with their 3-year-old daughter. The other contained a businessman's wife and 7-year-old daughter who were coming home from a piano lesson." "Rebecca and Lily," William whispered. "You were at a conference in Chicago," Margaret said gently. "The news report said you flew back immediately, but by the time you arrived, they were already gone." William sank into one of the waiting room chairs, his hands shaking. Isabella was there, in the same accident. Isabella looked between the 2 adults, sensing the gravity of the moment without fully understanding it. "What's wrong?" Why does everyone look sad? Margaret knelt down to Isabella's level. Sweetheart, do you remember anything about the accident when you were 3, when Mommy and Daddy went to heaven? Isabella's brow furrowed in concentration. Not really, just scary noises and lots of people, and being very cold and wanting you to come get me. William looked at this remarkable child with new understanding. They weren't just two strangers drawn together by mutual need. They were survivors of the same tragedy, who'd somehow found their way to each other 4 years later. Mrs. Sullivan, he said, his voice barely audible, why didn't you say something when I introduced myself? You had to know who I was. I wasn't sure at first. But when you said your wife and daughter's names, Margaret's voice grew gentle. William, I've thought about you and your family countless times over the years. I've wondered how you were coping, if you had support, if you'd found any peace. Nay, and I never knew Isabella existed, William said, looking at the little girl who was watching them with growing concern. I was so focused on my own loss, I never asked about the other family. Isabella moved to stand between them, placing one small hand on William's knee and the other on Margaret's. I don't understand what you're talking about, but you both look really sad. Did I do something wrong by asking Mr. William to be my daddy? William and Margaret looked at each other over Isabella's head, both struggling with the enormity of what this connection meant. No, sweetheart, Margaret said softly, you didn't do anything wrong. You might have done something very, very right. William reached out tentatively and touched Isabella's face. Bella, what would you say if I told you that my Lily was with your mommy and daddy that night, that they all went to heaven together? Isabella's eyes grew wide. Really, they were together, so they weren't alone. No, baby, William said, his voice thick with tears. They weren't alone. Isabella nodded solemnly, processing this information with the remarkable resilience of children. Then that means we were supposed to find each other. That's what Grandma Maggie calls meant to be. As the three of them sat in the quiet waiting room, surrounded by the everyday bustle of a community health clinic, William felt something shift in his chest. The desperate, clawing grief that had consumed him for 4 years didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else, a sense of purpose, of connection, of healing that went deeper than coincidence. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Margaret smiled through her tears. Now we go home, make some hot chocolate, and figure out how to build a family from the pieces of our broken hearts. And tomorrow, Isabella added with 7-year-old pragmatism, you can help me with my math homework. Mrs. Peterson says I need to practice my multiplication tables. William laughed for the first time in months, a real, genuine laugh that came from a place of joy rather than obligation. I think I can handle multiplication tables. As they gathered their coats and prepared to leave the clinic, none of them could have imagined how the road ahead would test their commitment to each other, or how the careful process of building legal family bonds would introduce them to someone who would complete their circle in ways they never expected. But for now, in this moment, they were simply 3 people who had found each other across the wreckage of shared tragedy, choosing to step toward healing together. The next 3 months passed in careful, deliberate steps toward building trust and family bonds. William had immediately started therapy with Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a grief counselor who specialized in traumatic loss, and the sessions were brutal but necessary. He was learning to process 4 years of suppressed anguish while simultaneously navigating the complex emotions of caring for a child who'd survived the same tragedy that had destroyed his world. Margaret had insisted on extensive background checks, character references, and gradual integration of William into their routine. He'd begun with supervised dinner visits twice a week, progressing to homework help sessions, and eventually weekend mornings that reminded him both painfully and beautifully of lazy Saturdays with Lily. The financial help had been handled with extreme delicacy. William had quietly established a trust for Isabella's education and future needs, then worked with Margaret to address their immediate concerns, medical bills, home repairs and groceries, without undermining her dignity or independence. Isabella had adapted to William's presence with the remarkable resilience that had carried her through losing her parents. She'd started calling him Mr. Daddy William, a compromise between formal and familiar that acknowledged their growing bond while respecting her complex relationship with the memory of her biological father. Which is why the knock on Margaret's door on a rainy March afternoon felt like a potential disaster. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm Janet Rodriguez from Child Protective Services. We've received a report about an unusual guardianship situation involving Isabella Santos." Margaret's blood ran cold, but she'd been expecting this. In a small community, word traveled fast about the wealthy businessman who'd suddenly become part of the Sullivan-Santos household. "What kind of report?" Margaret asked, inviting Ms. Rodriguez inside, where Isabella was working on a puzzle at the kitchen table, while William helped her identify edge pieces. Ms. Rodriguez consulted her tablet. "Anonymous concern about a 7-year-old living in close contact with an unrelated adult male who has no legal rights or official relationship to the child." William stood slowly, his expression calm but alert. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm William Harrison, Mrs. Sullivan and I have been very careful to maintain appropriate boundaries while I undergo grief counseling and we explore the possibility of legal adoption." "Mr. Harrison," Ms. Rodriguez said, clearly recognizing him, "I'm aware of your situation. The report specifically mentions your recent mental health crisis and questions the appropriateness of your involvement in Isabella's daily care." Margaret's protective instincts flared. "Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Harrison has been nothing but appropriate and beneficial for Isabella. He's helped with homework, attended school events with my permission, and provided stability during a difficult financial period." "I'm sure he has," Ms. Rodriguez replied professionally, "but we have to investigate all reports, especially when they involve children who've already experienced trauma. May I speak with Isabella privately?" Isabella looked up from her puzzle, immediately sensing the tension in the room. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Margaret said quickly. "Ms. Rodriguez just wants to make sure you're happy and safe." The interview was thorough but gentle. Isabella answered questions about her daily routine, her feelings about William's presence, whether anyone had ever made her uncomfortable or scared. Her responses were clear and consistent. She felt safe, loved, and excited about the possibility of William becoming her official father. After 30 minutes, Ms. Rodriguez emerged with Isabella, who looked concerned but not distressed. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Harrison, Isabella appears to be thriving. She speaks very fondly of your family arrangement and shows no signs of distress or inappropriate influence." Margaret and William exchanged a look of cautious relief. However, Ms. Rodriguez continued, "The situation requires proper legal framework. Mr. Harrison, if you want to pursue adoption, we need formal applications, home studies, psychological evaluations, and supervised transition periods." "What kind of timeline are we looking at?" William asked. 12 to 18 months minimum. "And during the initial evaluation period, I'm recommending structured visits with professional oversight." Isabella's face crumpled. "Does that mean Mr. Daddy William can't come to my spring concert next week or help with my science project?" "It means," Ms. Rodriguez said gently, "that we need to make sure everything is done properly and legally, so that if Mr. Harrison does become your daddy, no one can ever question it or take it away." William knelt down to Isabella's level. "Sweetheart, Ms. Rodriguez is trying to protect you and make sure our family is official and permanent. It might take some time, but if that's what we need to do, then that's what we'll do. Will you promise not to give up? Isabella asked, her voice small. I promise, William said without hesitation. We're going to be a real family, Isabella, whatever it takes, however long it takes. After Ms. Rodriguez left, with promises to begin the formal evaluation process, they sat around Margaret's kitchen table, processing what lay ahead. I need to ask you something, Margaret said to William. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once we start the formal adoption process, Isabella will begin thinking of this as permanent. If you have any doubts. I don't, William said firmly. Margaret, these past 3 months have been the first time I've felt alive since losing Rebecca and Lily. Isabella hasn't replaced my daughter. She's given me the chance to be a father again. There's a difference. Margaret nodded, satisfied by his conviction. Then we need the best family attorney money can buy, and we need to prepare for 1.5 years of scrutiny. Already on it, William said. I've contacted Patricia Morrison. She handled the adoption of my business partner's children. She specializes in complex family situations. Isabella had been listening to this conversation with the intense focus of a child whose future hung in the balance. Can I ask something? Of course, honey, Margaret said. Will I get to pick a new middle name, since I'll be Isabella Santos Harrison? William's breath caught. You want to keep Santos? It's my first daddy's name, Isabella explained matter-of-factly, but Harrison will be my new daddy's name, so I want both. The simple logic of a 7-year-old struck both adults as perfectly reasonable and deeply moving. I think that's a wonderful idea, William said, his voice thick with emotion. What middle name were you thinking? Margaret asked. Isabella considered this seriously. Maybe Rebecca, after your first little girl, because if she and my first parents are together in heaven, then she's kind of like my sister now. William had to turn away to hide his tears. The idea that Isabella wanted to honor Lily's mother's memory, that she understood the complexity of love and loss and family in ways that defied her young age, overwhelmed him completely. Isabella Rebecca Santos Harrison, Margaret said softly. That's a big name for a little girl. I'm not going to be little forever, Isabella replied with dignity. And it's a big family name because it has all my families in it. That evening, after Isabella was in bed, and Margaret had retired to her room with a book, William sat on the front porch of their small house, calling his therapist to schedule an emergency session. The day had been emotionally overwhelming. The CPS investigation, the formal adoption discussion, Isabella's desire to honor Rebecca's memory. Dr. Hoffman answered on the second ring. William, is everything all right? I need to ask you something, William said without preamble. Am I doing the right thing? This adoption, this family we're building, am I healing, or am I just finding a more elaborate way to avoid dealing with my grief? Dr. Hoffman was quiet for a moment. What do you think? I think, William said slowly, that for the first time in 4 years I want to be alive tomorrow. I want to see Isabella graduate from high school, teach her to drive, walk her down the aisle someday. I think about Lily and Rebecca and feel grateful for the time we had instead of just devastated by what I lost. And that frightens you? It frightens me because it feels like betrayal, like I'm replacing them. William, Dr. Hoffman said gently, love isn't finite. Loving Isabella doesn't diminish what you felt for Lily. It proves that love survives death and can grow in new directions. The CPS worker asked if I was prepared for all the challenges of raising a daughter, teenagers, heartbreak, college applications, and I realized I was excited about those challenges. Ah, that sounds like healing to me. William looked through the window at the warm light spilling from Margaret's kitchen, where she was preparing Isabella's lunch for tomorrow, probably including a small note of encouragement like she did every day. "Dr. Hoffman, I think I'm ready to reduce our sessions to once a week instead of twice." "That's significant progress, William. What's changed?" "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living, and I'm planning for a future that includes all the messy, complicated, beautiful parts of being a father." As William ended the call and prepared to go home to his empty penthouse, for now, he felt something he'd thought was gone forever: anticipation for tomorrow. Isabella had a science project due, Margaret had a doctor's appointment that he'd offered to drive her to, and somewhere in the bureaucratic maze of adoption procedures they were building something that would last. The road ahead would be long and scrutinized, but for the first time since losing everything, William Harrison was certain he was walking in the right direction. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's office felt like a sanctuary from the bureaucratic maze of adoption proceedings. Warm earth tones, comfortable furniture, and children's artwork created an atmosphere that immediately put families at ease. What William hadn't expected was how Dr. Mitchell herself would affect him. "So this is our first official family evaluation session," Dr. Mitchell said, settling into her chair across from William, Margaret, and Isabella. She was younger than he'd anticipated, probably mid-30s, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Patricia Morrison, their adoption attorney, had recommended Dr. Mitchell specifically for complex family situations involving grief and trauma. "She's the best in the state for cases like yours," Patricia had explained. "If anyone can help you navigate the psychological evaluation requirements, it's Sarah." "Isabella," Dr. Mitchell said warmly, "can you tell me what it means to you that Mr. William wants to adopt you?" Isabella's face lit up. "It means he'll be my real daddy forever, and nobody can ever make him go away. And it means I get to keep Grandma Maggie too, because we're all going to live in the same house." "And how does that make you feel?" "Happy and safe. And like I have the biggest family ever, because I have my first parents in heaven, and Grandma Maggie, and now Daddy William too." William felt his chest tighten with emotion at Isabella's casual use of Daddy William. Over the past 3 months, she'd gradually dropped the Mr. without fanfare, signaling a deeper acceptance of their relationship. Dr. Mitchell made notes, then turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Sullivan, what are your feelings about this adoption?" "Relief," Margaret said honestly. "I'm 68 years old, and my health isn't what it used to be. Knowing that Isabella will have someone young and capable to care for her if something happens to me, it's the greatest gift I could ask for." "And you're comfortable with Mr. Harrison's parenting approach?" "He's natural with children, patient, gentle, but firm when needed. Isabella has flourished under his attention." Margaret smiled. "Plus, he makes excellent pancakes, which is apparently a crucial parenting skill according to my granddaughter." Dr. Mitchell turned to William. "Mr. Harrison, this is a significant commitment. Are you prepared for the long-term reality of single-parenting a daughter through all stages of development?" "Dr. Mitchell, I've had 4 years to think about all the milestones I'd never share with my daughter Lily, the opportunity to experience those moments with Isabella. It's not a consolation prize. It's a gift I never expected to receive." "How do you see your role evolving as Isabella gets older?" William considered the question carefully. "I want to be the father who teaches her that she deserves respect, who shows her what love should look like, who supports her dreams even when I don't understand them. I want to be present for every piano recital, every heartbreak, every triumph." Dr. Mitchell continued the evaluation for 2 hours, exploring family dynamics, communication patterns, and coping strategies. Isabella played with toys in the corner while the adults discussed practical matters like education, healthcare, and financial planning. "I have to say, Doctor Mitchell concluded, "This is one of the most well-thought-out adoption plans I've encountered. Isabella is clearly thriving, and your family unit is remarkably stable given the circumstances." "What's our timeline looking like?" William asked. "The formal evaluation process will take 12 to 15 months. Home studies, psychological assessments, background checks, supervised visits, but I'll be writing a preliminary recommendation that supports moving forward." After the session, as they gathered their coats, Dr. Mitchell touched William's arm. "Mr. Harrison, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Margaret took Isabella to the waiting room while William lingered behind. "I wanted to tell you," Dr. Mitchell said quietly, "what you're doing is remarkable. I've seen a lot of grief in my practice, and the way you've channeled your loss into something positive, it's inspiring." I had good teachers," William replied, glancing toward the waiting room where Isabella was showing Margaret something in a children's magazine. "Still, it takes tremendous courage." Dr. Mitchell hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your wife and daughter would be proud of the man you've become through this process." The words hit William unexpectedly hard. "Do you really think so?" "I do. You're not replacing them. You're honoring them by loving again." Over the following weeks, William found himself looking forward to their evaluation sessions as much for Dr. Mitchell's presence as for the progress they represented. She had a way of asking questions that helped him understand his own motivations, of guiding conversations that strengthened their family bonds. "Mr. William," Isabella said one evening as he helped her with homework, "do you like Dr. Mitchell?" The question caught him off guard. "Of course I like her, sweetheart. She's very good at her job." "No, I mean, do you like her, the way princes like princesses in movies?" William felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Isabella, that's complicated. Dr. Mitchell is helping with our adoption. It wouldn't be appropriate." "But after the adoption is done," Isabella pressed with 7-year-old logic. "Grandma Maggie says you're too young to be alone forever, and Dr. Mitchell is really pretty and nice." "What does Grandma Maggie know about my romantic life?" William asked, deflecting. "She says you look at Dr. Mitchell the way Daddy used to look at Mommy in their wedding pictures, all happy and like you forgot to be sad for a minute." That evening, as William sat in his penthouse apartment reviewing adoption paperwork, he couldn't shake Isabella's observation. Was he developing feelings for Dr. Mitchell? And if so, what did that mean for their family's future? His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. Dr. Mitchell's name appeared on the screen. "William? I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all. Is everything all right with Isabella's evaluation?" "Oh yes, everything's fine. Actually, I'm calling about something else." She paused. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I believe I need to transfer your case to a colleague." William's stomach dropped. "Why? Have we done something wrong?" "No, not at all. It's just—" Another pause. "William, I need to maintain professional boundaries, and I'm finding that increasingly difficult." "I don't understand." "I think you do," she said softly. "I've seen how you look at me during our sessions. And if I'm being honest, I look forward to seeing you and your family more than is strictly professional." William felt his heart rate increase. "Sarah, I can recommend Dr. Patricia Gonzalez. She's excellent, and she can complete your evaluation without any complications. What if I don't want you to transfer the case? Then we maintain our professional relationship until the adoption is finalized, and we don't explore anything else." William thought about Isabella's innocent question, about Margaret's knowing looks, about the way Sarah's smile could brighten his entire day. "Transfer the case," he said finally. "Really? Really? Because once this adoption is finalized, I'd very much like to take you to dinner, somewhere that serves more than just coffee and child psychology textbooks." He could hear the smile in her voice. "I'd like that too." 2 weeks later, As Dr. Gonzalez took over their family evaluation, William felt strange about the transition. But when Sarah called that evening just to ask how Isabella's school play had gone, he realized they'd made the right choice. "So," she said, "I hear there's a spring festival at Isabella's school next weekend." "There is. She's very excited about the ring toss booth. Would it be completely inappropriate if I happened to be in the neighborhood?" As a friend of the family, not as a professional, William smiled, looking at Isabella's carefully displayed artwork covering his refrigerator. "I think Isabella would be delighted to show off her ring toss skills to her favorite doctor." "Just to her favorite doctor?" Sarah asked teasingly. "Well," William said, feeling lighter than he had in years, "I might be pretty happy to see you too." As he ended the call and prepared for bed, William reflected on how much his life had changed in just 6 months. He was in the middle of adopting a remarkable child, building a relationship with a woman who understood both his past and his future, and for the first time since losing Rebecca and Lily, he was planning for happiness rather than just survival. Tomorrow would bring more paperwork, more evaluations, more steps toward making their family official. But tonight, he fell asleep thinking about Sarah's laugh and Isabella's excitement about the spring festival and the beautiful complexity of building love on the foundation of loss. 15 months into the adoption process, just when everything seemed to be falling into place, William's carefully constructed world received a devastating blow. It came in the form of a certified letter from Morrison, Kellerman and Associates, a law firm he'd never heard of. "Mr. Harrison," Patricia Morrison said over the phone, her usually confident voice strained. "We have a problem, a big one." William was in his new office, the one he'd set up in the house he'd bought for his growing family. Isabella was at school, Margaret was napping in her granny flat, and Sarah was at work. The domestic tranquility of his afternoon was shattered by Patricia's next words. "Rebecca's sister is contesting the adoption." William felt the world tilt. "What do you mean, Rebecca's sister?" "Diane Caldwell. Apparently, she's been following your situation through mutual friends and social media. She's filed a petition claiming you're psychologically unfit to raise a child and that Isabella should be placed with blood relatives." "Blood relatives?" William's voice came out as a whisper. "Rebecca and I didn't have any living family. That's why we were so isolated in our grief. Mr. Harrison, Diane is claiming that as Rebecca's sister and Lily's aunt, she has more right to provide a stable home for Isabella than you do. She's arguing that your attachment to Isabella is the result of untreated mental illness and that you're using her as a substitute for your deceased daughter." William sank into his chair, his hands shaking. "That's insane. Isabella isn't related to Rebecca or Lily. She's not related to Diane. I know that, and you know that, but Diane is claiming that your judgment is so impaired by grief that you've convinced yourself Isabella is somehow connected to your lost family." "She is connected," William said fiercely. "She was in the same accident." "William, stop!" Patricia's voice was firm. "Don't say that on a recorded line. Diane's lawyers will use any mention of mystical connections or fate to prove their point about your mental state." William stared out the window at the swing set he'd installed in the backyard, the one where Isabella spent hours each afternoon, often talking to what she called her heaven parents. "Patricia, what does this mean for our family?" "It means we're going to court. Diane has requested an emergency evaluation of your fitness as a parent and a temporary suspension of the adoption proceedings." "Can she do that?" "She can try. And unfortunately, she has some ammunition. Your 4-year period of isolation, your recent psychiatric treatment, the unusual circumstances of how you met Isabella, it all feeds into a narrative of an unstable man making irrational decisions." William thought about telling Isabella that their family might be torn apart, about explaining to Margaret that their careful plans could be destroyed by someone who'd never even met them. How long do we have? 2 weeks until the preliminary hearing. William, I'm not going to lie to you. This is serious. We need character witnesses, updated psychological evaluations, and ironclad proof that Isabella is thriving in your care. That evening, William sat at the kitchen table with Margaret and Sarah. The legal documents spread between them like evidence of some terrible crime. Isabella was upstairs, supposedly doing homework, but probably listening through the heating vents, as she often did when the adults had serious talks. "I don't understand," Margaret said for the 3rd time. "Who is this woman? What right does she have to disrupt our family?" "Legally, very little," Sarah replied, studying the papers. "But emotionally, she's positioning herself as the voice of reason against a grieving man's desperate attachment to a child who reminds him of his lost daughter." "That's not what this is," William said fiercely. "Yes, I was broken when I met Isabella. Yes, I needed purpose and love, but what we've built, it's real. It's not some grief-induced delusion." "I know that," Sarah said gently, "but we have to prove it to a judge who doesn't know us." Margaret stood up stiffly, her arthritis bothering her more lately. "I'm going to make some calls. 30 years as a nurse in this community means I know people, doctors, social workers, teachers. We're going to show this judge exactly what kind of father William has become." After Margaret went upstairs and Sarah left for the evening, William sat alone with the legal papers. The house felt different now, less like a home and more like something fragile that could be taken away. "Daddy, William," Isabella's voice came from the stairs. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with unicorns that she insisted made her brave. "Hey, sweetheart, I thought you were doing homework." "I finished." She climbed into his lap, snuggling against his chest with the easy affection that had developed over their 18 months together. "Are you sad? You feel sad?" William held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm a little worried about some grown-up things, but nothing for you to worry about." "Is someone trying to take me away from our family?" The directness of her question shouldn't have surprised him. Isabella had always been unnaturally perceptive. "Someone thinks they might be able to take better care of you than we can." Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think they could?" "No, baby. I think our family is exactly what you need, and you're exactly what we need." "Then we'll fight," Isabella said with 7-year-old certainty. "Grandma Maggie says when something is worth keeping, you fight for it, and our family is worth keeping." 2 weeks later, William stood in family court facing Diane Caldwell for the first time. She was younger than Rebecca had been when she died, impeccably dressed and accompanied by lawyers who clearly cost more than most people made in a year. "Your Honor," Diane's attorney began, "my client is here today out of concern for the welfare of a child who has become the focus of an emotionally unstable man's misguided attempt to replace his deceased family." William's lawyer, Patricia Morrison, stood to respond. "Your Honor, what we have here is a woman who has never met the child in question, attempting to disrupt a loving, stable family unit out of misplaced grievance over her sister's death." Judge Harrison, no relation, despite the shared name, studied the files before her. "Ms. Caldwell, you claim that Mr. Harrison is unfit to parent. On what specific grounds?" Diane stood, her voice shaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "Your Honor, my sister Rebecca and her daughter Lily were everything to me after our parents died. When they were killed, William disappeared. For 4 years, he was unreachable, refusing all contact with Rebecca's friends, ignoring memorial services, abandoning all the people who loved my sister. And this concerns the current adoption. How? Because he's trying to replace Lily with this little girl." He's convinced himself that some cosmic force brought them together, when really he's just a traumatized man making dangerous decisions. Judge Harrison turned to William. "Mr. Harrison, how do you respond to these allegations?" William stood, looking at Isabella, who was sitting between Margaret and Sarah in the gallery. "Your Honor, I won't deny that I was in a dark place after losing my wife and daughter, but meeting Isabella didn't replace my grief. It gave me a reason to heal from it. She's not a substitute for Lily. She's her own remarkable person who deserves a father who will love and protect her. And the circumstances of how you met? Isabella found me at my lowest point and showed me kindness that probably saved my life. We discovered that our families were connected by tragedy, but we chose to build something beautiful from that shared loss." The hearing continued for 3 hours, with testimony from Dr. Gonzalez, Margaret, Isabella's teachers, and even Chef Marco from Milano's, who spoke about Isabella's routine of collecting food and how much happier she'd seemed since William entered her life. Finally, Judge Harrison called Isabella to the witness stand. Unusual for a child her age, but Isabella had specifically requested to speak. "Isabella," the judge said gently, "do you understand what's happening here today?" "Yes, Mom. Some people think Daddy William isn't good for me, but they're wrong." "Why do you think they're wrong?" Isabella sat up straighter, her voice clear and confident. "Because Daddy William doesn't try to make me forget my first parents. He helps me remember them, and he doesn't try to make me be like Lily. He likes me for being me." "What would happen if you couldn't live with Mr. Harrison anymore?" Isabella's voice grew very small. "I would be sad, but I would know that he fought for me, and that means I'm worth fighting for." Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you, Isabella. You may return to your seat." The ruling came down a week later. The adoption could proceed with the caveat that William would undergo additional psychological evaluation and that the family would participate in court-supervised counseling for 6 months. "In my 30 years on the bench," Judge Harrison wrote in her decision, "I have rarely seen a child more articulate about her own needs or more certain about her family relationships. While the circumstances of this adoption are unusual, the evidence overwhelmingly supports that Isabella Santos is thriving in the care of William Harrison and Margaret Sullivan." That evening, as they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and Isabella's favorite ice cream cake, William felt something he'd thought was lost forever after the accident: absolute certainty about his future. "So," Sarah said, raising her wine glass, "here's to families that fight for each other." "To families that choose each other," Margaret corrected. "To families that find each other when they need it most," William added, looking at Isabella, who was trying to use chopsticks with limited success. "To families that have the best ice cream cake," Isabella contributed, making everyone laugh. As William helped clean up the dishes later, he reflected on how close they'd come to losing everything. But they'd weathered the storm together, and now their family bond was not just emotional, it was legally recognized and protected. Tomorrow would bring the final adoption paperwork, more counseling sessions, and the ordinary challenges of raising a precocious 8-year-old. But tonight, surrounded by the people who mattered most, William Harrison finally understood what it meant to be home. 18 months later, on a perfect May morning, William Harrison stood in family court for the final time as Isabella's guardian. Today, he would officially become her father in the eyes of the law, completing a journey that had transformed all their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. "Isabella Rebecca Santos Harrison," Judge Harrison said with a rare smile. "How does it feel to know that today you're officially becoming a Harrison?" Isabella, now 8.5 and wearing her best dress, stood confidently at the podium. "It feels like something that was always supposed to happen finally did. Like when you're working on a really hard puzzle and suddenly you find the piece that makes everything fit together. And Mr. Harrison, Are you ready to take on all the legal responsibilities and joys of fatherhood? William looked down at Isabella, who was beaming up at him with pure happiness. Your Honor, I've been Isabella's father in my heart for over 2 years. Today just makes it official. Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Isabella, meet your father. Mr. Harrison, meet your daughter. The courtroom erupted in applause from their gathered family and friends. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Sarah, now wearing an engagement ring that sparkled in the courtroom lights, captured every moment with her camera. The celebration dinner that evening was held in their backyard, the same garden where William and Sarah had shared their first kiss 2 years earlier. The house had grown with their family. Isabella's artwork covered the refrigerator, family photos lined the hallways, and the sound of laughter regularly filled rooms that had once stood empty. So, Margaret said, raising her wineglass as Isabella giggled over her sparkling apple cider, a toast to our family. Born from the most unexpected circumstances, built with patience and love, and blessed with the wisdom to recognize that the best things in life often come wrapped in the hardest packages. To family, William echoed, his eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. They'd been engaged for 6 months now, taking their time to build their relationship alongside the adoption process. Their wedding was planned for the fall, when Isabella would serve as maid of honor and Margaret would officiate. And to Dr. Sarah, Isabella added importantly, who's going to be my mom soon, which means I'll have the most parents of anybody in my whole class. Sarah laughed, reaching over to ruffle Isabella's hair. Just Sarah is fine, sweetheart, though I like the sound of mom too. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, William found himself on the back porch with Margaret, watching Isabella and Sarah chase fireflies in the garden. You know, Margaret said quietly, when Isabella first told me about the sad man behind Milano's, I thought she was just trying to fix another broken bird. She's always been drawn to things that need healing. And now I think maybe she was exactly where she needed to be, when she needed to be there. Margaret smiled. Some people would call it coincidence. Others would call it fate. I prefer to call it grace. William thought about that night 2.5 years ago when he'd reached his absolute lowest point and a 7-year-old girl had offered him leftovers and hope in equal measure. She saved my life that night. You saved each other's lives, Margaret corrected. That's what families do. From the garden, Isabella's voice called out. Daddy William, Sarah, come see how many fireflies I caught. It's just Daddy now, remember? Sarah called back, taking William's hand as they walked down the porch steps together. I know, Isabella replied, carefully releasing a firefly from her cupped hands. But sometimes I like saying all the words, because they remind me how we got to be a family. Later that night, after Isabella had been tucked into bed with stories and kisses from all her parents, William sat in his study reviewing the day's court documents. The adoption certificate bore official seals and signatures, but what struck him most was the simple phrase at the bottom, "In the best interests of the child." Sarah found him there an hour later, still staring at the papers. "Regrets?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his desk. "The opposite," William replied. "I'm thinking about how different my life is from what I planned. Rebecca and I had such clear visions of our future. The house we'd build, the vacations we'd take, watching Lily grow up and start her own family. And now I realize that life isn't about the plans we make. It's about what we build from the pieces that remain after those plans fall apart." He looked at Sarah, this woman who'd helped heal his heart and complete their family. "I could never have planned for Isabella or for you or for any of this. But I can't imagine it any other way." Sarah moved to perch on the arm of his chair. "Speaking of building things from unexpected pieces, have you given any thought to our honeymoon destination?" William smiled, pulling her into his lap. Actually, I was thinking we could ask Isabella where she'd like to go. Make it a family honeymoon. Most couples want alone time on their honeymoon. Most couples aren't us. Besides, I like the idea of starting our marriage the way we've built our relationship, with Isabella as part of everything. In that case, I should warn you that she's been dropping hints about Disney World. Disney World it is then. As they prepared for bed, William reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate night in the alley to this moment of complete contentment, he'd learned that healing wasn't about returning to who you were before tragedy struck. It was about becoming someone new, someone shaped by loss, but not defined by it. William, Sarah's voice was soft in the darkness of their bedroom. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about Lily and Rebecca, and how I used to be afraid that loving you and Isabella meant forgetting them. And now I think they would be proud of the man I've become, the father I've learned to be again. I think they'd love our family. Sarah curled closer to him. I think they'd especially love Isabella. She has the same generous heart that drew you to both of them. From down the hall, they could hear Isabella talking softly to herself, or perhaps to the heaven parents she still conversed with regularly. It had become one of the comforting sounds of their household, alongside Margaret's evening news programs and the settling of a house filled with love. Tomorrow, William said, I'm going to start teaching Isabella how to ride the bike we got her for Christmas. The one she's been too scared to try. She's not scared anymore. Today, she told me that now that the adoption is official, she feels brave enough to try new things. And what new things are you going to try, Daddy William? William smiled at the nickname that had evolved into a term of endearment, even after becoming unnecessary. I'm going to try being the father Isabella deserves, the husband you deserve, and the son Margaret deserves. I'm going to try building a future that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. D. As sleep finally came, William's last conscious thought was of gratitude for the drunk driver who'd brought devastating loss but ultimately led to unexpected blessings, for Isabella's courage in approaching a stranger, for Margaret's wisdom in trusting them both, and for Sarah's patience in helping him learn to love again. In the end, Isabella had been right from the very beginning. Sometimes the people who need each other most find each other in the darkest moments. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love really is the best leftover of all. It just gets better when you share it with the right people. The Harrison family had learned that some stories don't end with happily ever after. Instead, they begin with it, building happiness from the foundation of shared loss, and choosing every day to love fiercely and completely, in spite of, or perhaps because of, knowing how precious and fragile that love can be. 1 year after the adoption was finalized, William stood in the same backyard garden, this time wearing a tuxedo, and watching Sarah walk down an aisle lined with white roses and Isabella's carefully arranged wildflowers. Margaret, now ordained and beaming despite her wheelchair, officiated the ceremony that would complete their family circle. Do you, William James Harrison, take Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and cherish through joy and sorrow, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? William's voice was strong and clear. I do. With all my heart, I do. And do you, Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, take William James Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and support through triumph and trial, in laughter and tears, for as long as you both shall live? Sarah's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. I absolutely do. Isabella, resplendent in her maid-of-honor dress, stepped forward with the rings. These are special rings, she announced to the gathered guests with 8-year-old authority, because they're not just for Daddy William and Sarah, they're for our whole family. As William slipped the wedding band onto Sarah's finger, he whispered, "Thank you for making us complete." Thank you for teaching me that love multiplies when you share it, Sarah whispered back. The reception lasted well into the evening, with dancing under string lights and toasts that brought both laughter and happy tears. Isabella had insisted on a chocolate fountain, which proved to be a hit with guests of all ages, though it did result in several impressive stains on formal attire. "You know," Margaret said, accepting another piece of wedding cake from William, "when I was raising Isabella those first few years alone, I used to worry about what would happen when I got too old to chase after her. I never imagined I'd be sitting at my granddaughter's father's wedding, watching her gain a mother who loves her as fiercely as I do." "Margaret," William said, settling into the chair beside her, "you gave Isabella the foundation that made her strong enough to trust strangers, wise enough to see past pain to potential. Without that foundation, none of this would have been possible. Don't give me all the credit. That little girl has always had an old soul and a generous heart. I just tried not to break what was already beautiful." Across the dance floor, Sarah was teaching Isabella a complicated sequence of steps she'd learned in college, both of them laughing when they inevitably got tangled up. The sight filled William with such contentment that he had to look away for a moment, overwhelmed by gratitude. "Daddy William," Isabella appeared at his elbow, slightly out of breath from dancing, "can we have family pictures now? All of us together?" The photographer arranged them in various combinations. William and Sarah, the 3 generations of women, Isabella with her parents, the entire family group. But William's favorite shot would always be the candid one, Isabella in the middle, holding both his and Sarah's hands, all 3 of them laughing at something Margaret had said from her wheelchair beside them. 3 months later, they moved into a larger house in the same neighborhood, one with room for Sarah's psychology practice, a master suite that could accommodate William's work-from-home needs, and a beautiful apartment for Margaret that maintained her independence while keeping her close to Isabella. "This is perfect," Isabella declared, exploring her new bedroom with its reading nook and art supplies corner. "Now everyone has their own space, but we're still all together." William found Sarah unpacking boxes in what would become their shared office. "Any regrets about the instant family package?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Only that it took us so long to get here," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "William, I need to tell you something." His heart skipped. "What?" Sarah turned in his arms, her face glowing with a secret she'd been holding for weeks. "We're going to need to convert the guest room into a nursery." William stared at her, processing the words. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that in about 7 months, Isabella is going to be a big sister." The joy that flooded through William was different from anything he'd experienced. Not the desperate gratitude of a drowning man finding a life preserver, but the deep satisfaction of a man whose cup was overflowing. "Does Isabella know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." Now they told Isabella and Margaret together that evening, gathered around the kitchen table of their new home. Isabella's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Really? A real baby? That I get to help take care of?" She bounced in her seat. "Can we name it after someone from heaven, like Rebecca if it's a girl, or David if it's a boy?" William felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Isabella, that's a beautiful idea." "Or maybe Lily if it's a girl," Isabella continued thoughtfully, "because then she'd be like my sister in a different way." Sarah reached across the table to take Isabella's hand. "We'll think about all those names when the time comes. Right now, I just want to make sure you're happy about becoming a big sister." "Are you kidding? I've been practicing for years with my dolls. I'm going to be the best big sister ever." Margaret wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Well, I suppose I need to start knitting baby blankets again. It's been a while, but I think I remember how." As winter turned to spring, their house filled with the preparations for new life. Isabella threw herself into big sister preparations with characteristic enthusiasm, reading books about babies, helping Sarah set up the nursery, and talking constantly to her heaven parents about the new addition to their family. "I told them all about you and Daddy William and Grandma Maggie," she announced one evening at dinner. "And I said the new baby is going to have the biggest family ever, with people who love them on earth and people who watch over them from heaven." The baby arrived on a perfect May morning, exactly 3 years after William and Isabella had first met behind Milano's restaurant. Rebecca Sarah Harrison, Isabella had lobbied successfully for both names, came into the world healthy and beautiful, with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. "She's perfect," Isabella whispered, holding her baby sister for the first time, while William and Sarah watched through exhausted but happy tears. "Welcome to our family, baby Rebecca. You're going to love it here." Margaret, despite her arthritis, proved to be an invaluable grandmother, her decades of nursing experience making her the calm presence they all needed during those first chaotic months of new parenthood. "You know," William said one evening, rocking baby Rebecca while Sarah rested and Isabella did homework at the kitchen table, "I used to think that losing Lily and my first Rebecca was the end of my story, that everything meaningful in my life was finished. And now," Sarah asked, curling up beside him on the couch, "now I understand that it wasn't the end. It was a chapter break, a very painful chapter break, but not the end of the story." Isabella looked up from her math worksheet. "What's the new chapter called?" William considered this seriously. "I think it's called The Family That Found Each Other." Or The Leftovers and Love Story," Isabella suggested with a grin, "because we all started as leftovers from other families, but then we made something new and even better." 5 years later, as William helped Isabella pack for her first year of college, he found himself amazed by the confident, compassionate young woman she'd become. At 18, she was studying to become a social worker, inspired by her own experiences with family creation and loss. "Dad," she said, using the name that had evolved naturally from Daddy William as she'd grown older, "I want you to know something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "When I was little and I found you crying behind Milano's, I thought I was helping you, but now I understand that you were helping me too. You taught me that love doesn't run out when you share it with more people. It just gets bigger." William felt the familiar tightness in his throat that Isabella's profound observations always triggered. "You taught me that too, Isabella. You taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting what you've lost. It means learning to carry love forward." "Promise me something," Isabella asked, folding her favorite sweater into her suitcase. "Anything. Promise me you'll tell Rebecca and little David our story when they're old enough to understand. About how families can be made from the most broken pieces, and how sometimes the best love comes from the deepest loss." William smiled, thinking of 5-year-old Rebecca and 3-year-old David Harrison, both of whom had inherited Isabella's wisdom and compassion, along with his and Sarah's determination to love fiercely despite knowing how fragile life could be. "I promise." "And Isabella, thank you for teaching a broken man that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask a stranger if they need help. Thank you for teaching a scared little girl that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose for yourself." Oli! Years later, when Isabella brought her own children to visit their grandfather William and step-grandmother Sarah, she would tell them the story of how their family began with leftovers and a broken heart, proving that the most beautiful families aren't always the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose to build together. She would tell them about the night behind Milano's restaurant when a 7-year-old girl offered hope to a desperate man, and how that single act of kindness had rippled through generations, creating love stories that neither time nor tragedy could diminish.